Welcome everyone. Just making sure everything's working smooth right now. Seems good. I'm also broadcasting this to YouTube because I found out I could do that. I'm just gonna paste that to my Facebook, the YouTube link. And yeah, all right, I see people are already putting stuff in the poll, which is exciting. All right, so this course is basically something I wanted to do for a while, and I feel like now is a good time because people have a bit more free time, and you know, doing it online makes the most sense because we all have to stay at home right now. If you're not staying at home, go home. So yeah, the point of this course is really to go from the very basics of coding in a path that I've thought about and changed my mind about a few times, to yeah, just people who are interested and maybe scared, you know, showing that it's just a bunch of steps along the way. You don't have to know everything to do this one little thing that you want. You know, overall, pretty much any project I do, I don't know every little thing in my head of what to do. It's a lot of, you know, looking up stuff and just taking it one task at a time, you know, Googling and this one thing I have this one problem I want to do. I want to solve it, solve that, and then move on to the next one. So it doesn't have to be as intimidating as I think a lot of people think it is. So essentially what we're going to be doing this week is, yeah, starting really from the basics. Now, there's a lot of different things you can code. You know, you can do things like front-end web development. So, you know, that's like HTML and CSS and JavaScript to make a web page. There's back-end web development, which is kind of like the stuff the code that runs on the server to power that web page. You could do app development, you know, native apps and whatnot for your phone. There's also a whole industry of people building just things that don't even have really an interface. Things like services and bots, things that crawl the web and find stuff, work with other services, all that kind of stuff. You can also do desktop software development. So, you know, making things like Photoshop or, you know, maybe simpler than that. There's game development. There's also hardware development, which seems really complicated and advanced, but actually in the last few years, things like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis have made that a lot more accessible. And many other examples I could probably come up with, but one sec. People saying they can't get in. Where was I? Just give me 1 second. Troubleshooting people. I'm just gonna repaste this link somewhere. There's probably a way for me to get the link from here. I'll just look at the one on my Facebook. Sorry, technical, it's always technical challenges on Tech Talks. Okay. So yeah, lots of different things you could code. And rather than trying to learn all that stuff now, which would be next to impossible, I feel like the best way to focus it is on the on web development. front-end web development specifically. So what we're going to be starting with are things like HTML, CSS, and then eventually JavaScript. Today, we're only going to be talking about the first two of those things because JavaScript's a whole another ballpark. So yeah, I want to get you guys all this knowledge into your brains. But first, let's review the poll. I'm seeing, so the first question was what people are interested in making. And it seems like it's a tie right now for games and websites, which is good because we're going to be talking about websites. That's followed by apps, then robots, then social platforms, and then other. I wonder what other could mean. Could be anything. It seems like in terms of what people have heard of, everyone's heard of HTML. Most people have heard of CSS. Everyone who's answered the poll has heard of JavaScript. A lot of us have heard about Python, some jQuery, some WordPress, and on the lesser end, things like React, Angular, and Unity. We will eventually touch on all these things. And then I asked a question just about what people would consider themselves based on a few choices. People being interested in coding, people being scared of coding, excited, and unsure. And it seems pretty even. A lot of people, more people are interested than scared or excited or unsure, but that's to be expected, I guess. That's why you're all here. And then, yeah, this is perfect. So another question was, I would consider myself in terms of experience level. And we have things like, I know nothing yet. And that's actually 57% of people, and followed by 43% beginners. So pretty glad about that because I think if anyone answered expert, unless they were just here to see me mess up on camera, they would be very disappointed in this cast because it's going to be too basic for them. And then yeah, we have actually more people on a Mac than Windows, and more people on an iPhone than Linux. Oh wait, that doesn't make sense. More people, no one put yes for Android. Cool. No one also. I also put the Nokia 3310 phone in here. I was hoping someone would at least have that. So I'll keep this poll running for a bit longer. Maybe we can review it after as more people submit it. So we're just going to get started now after that little bit of a fun intro. So we'll just talk about a couple things first. In this phase of the course, well, really, you don't have to do anything. You can just watch and take it in. But the only things you would need if you wanted to follow along, for example, is a text editor. I recommend personally VS Code. There's also, you could just use, if you're on Windows, you could just use Notepad because we're not doing anything fancy that requires any sophisticated build processes or anything. We're just going to be editing text and saving it. You also need a web browser, which I assume all of you have. Chrome is my go-to, but any browser will work. And that's basically all you would need. So we're going to go through some concepts here on some slides that I have prepared, and I'm going to share my screen. Share screen. This one. Okay. And I need to move this guy that's blocking me. I'll put it over here. And we're going to open up this guy. The second one. There we go. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Where did... So just want to keep these things all open. It's weird, when I went full screen mode, everything, all my windows that were in nice places all kind of just decided to hide themselves. Poll's still open. Cool. We're good. All right. So we're going to talk about HTML first. HTML in terms of web, it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's generally a .html file. When you name the file, you'll call it, page.html. You can also use .htm, that will work, but no one does that anymore. version, these version numbers aren't going to matter. They don't mean anything, but basically 5.2, at least when I'm, last looked, is the most recent version, but not too much has changed in HTML in a while. It was originally released in 1993. A lot has changed since then, a lot of new features and accessibility features and whatnot, but it's been around for a while. It was kind of like the first thing when the World Wide Web, not when the internet came out, but when the World Wide Web came out, it was really all there was. You made HTML and that's it. And it's basically used just to generate the content of a web page. So it has no, although there's little things you can do, it basically has nothing to do with like the style or the interactivity of it. It's just really the content and the structure. So a basic HTML file looks like this. This is about as simple as you could get. The first line here is essentially telling the web browser like what this kind of file is, and specifically an HTML file. If you don't have this, things will still work, but the browser kind of will get mad at you. And basically the way, these are essentially called tags. And a tag always has an opener and a closer. So for instance, you can see that there's HTML. And then at the very bottom, there's also another one, HTML, with a slash on it. That's kind of saying that everything within this, and you can see I kind of indented them to illustrate this a little bit better. Everything with inside of it is part of that. So you can kind of think of it as like a wrapper. Everything inside this HTML wrapper is part of the HTML page. And on an HTML document, you never have anything other than this before. That's the only thing that comes before, and nothing ever comes after. It's always the last part of your file. And then it's broken into two separate sections. There's the head and there's the body. The head is kind of like metadata. It will have things like your title. It might have links to, what graphic you want to show when people share it to social media. It might have things like what language this web page is made in, and so forth. It also has something called the title. And this is the title that shows up in your web browser, in the tab that you're on in the top of your web browser. But it also is a title that if places like Google will pull from. So make sure your title is good, something almost as good as this is a title. Then we have the body. So the body is where your actual content goes. So you can think of basically anything in the body is stuff that's going to be visible to a user. So we have that. And I put an example tag in here. We're going to be going over a bunch of other tags. This is a P tag, stands for paragraph. And you can put some text in it and it will basically render that text in a paragraph. Meaning if you had two of these, there'd be a little bit of space between them by default, and whatnot. So as I was saying about paragraphs, here's the example of it. So we're gonna do some nomenclature now. Basically a tag has a name and the name is P. And it has contents. So similar to how we were showing like how there's an opening tag and a closing tag and stuff in between it. These are like, this is the contents of it. So tag name, paragraph text is the content, and then we have to close it. So it's always like the same, but a / before the tag name. I can give you another example of a tag right now. This one's a little more complicated. There's a little bit more going on here. So this is called an A tag. It's basically A because it's an anchor tag. It's used for links. So it has a name of A. It has contents of link text. But there's this other thing going on here, which I've made a different color. There's basically an attribute and a value. So attributes are essentially properties that you can give a tag. In this case, we're giving it href. Href is, I forget what it stands for right now, but it's basically like, you could consider it like the same as saying URL. So href is the name of the attribute. And then anytime you have an attribute, you put $, and then generally quotation marks. And you put in the value. And in this case, the value is this wonderful website. If you haven't heard of it, definitely check it out because you're going to be using it a lot if you're learning a code. So what this would do is it would render a tag on the screen that it'll be by default blue with like a blue underline, and it will say link text. And when you click it, it will go to this website. Cool. Here's another example. This is an image tag. So it's called img. It has an attribute called source, which we're saying is test.jpg. So that would be a reference to an image called test that you're basically have in the same folder as your HTML file. But we actually have multiple attributes here, and pretty much all tags can have multiple attributes. So we're giving another one called width. And this will denote that this should render on the page. No matter what the size of the source graphic is, I want to make the width 300. And images are nice because you can set a width, you can set a height, but you can just set one and it will automatically compute what the other one is to keep the aspect ratio the same if that's your purpose. Now, there might be something that you notice about this tag that's different than others. And there's a few other tags like this. And what it is called is a self-closing tag. Because an image itself doesn't really have content, because this is really the content of it, the test.jpg. There's no reason to open up an image tag, put something beside it, and then close it. So it actually self-closes, which is what you're seeing here, compared to here where we opened it, we wrote some stuff, and then we closed it. So you can kind of see the difference there. And when I get to writing some code, it might be even more clear. All right, we will move on. Okay, so this is kind of just a review of what we already looked at with a few more things. So we had that paragraph tag. There's some other tags that I want to show, H1 all the way to H6. These are essentially like headings. So semantically, your web page should only have one H1 because it's kind of telling like screen readers and search engines that this is the most important title on my site. Usually it's like, the thing in the top of your site that's your website name. And it will by default render as like a big bold text. H2 is basically the same thing, but a little bit smaller, and you can go all the way to H6. Anything beyond that does not exist in, you can't, there's no such thing as an H7. We already talked about link, here we go. And we talked about image. This time I'm, instead of putting a local image in, I can paste in a URL of an image. So if you find a website that you like and you want to steal their image without actually downloading it, you can do what's called hot linking it and just put in the source like this. And then they get mad because, your website is using someone else's server to serve bandwidth to people. So don't do that unless it's a service like placekitten.com. And placekitten.com, since we're talking about it, just so you know, it's actually a really sweet website when you do want to use when you do want to put in images and they're just temporary. It's basically a site where you can go and you can copy something like this. And essentially you can change these values here. It'd be like 500, and that's going to change the width of it, and 300, maybe I want a really skinny one. And just grabs a cat and gives you an image of exactly the size that you say. That was, that was the cats. Okay, we're gonna go back to this. So we're already there, we already said that. Okay, a few other basic tags. So those are like, to me, the most basic. Oh, we didn't talk about, there's bold and italic. That just makes your text bold, makes your text italic. Pretty straightforward. Okay. What do we got here? More HTML tags. Here's another self-closing one. It's called an HR. It's for a horizontal rule, basically just to make a horizontal line on your web page. Good for breaking up content. Then we can get into things like lists. So I'm sure in Microsoft Word, you've made bulleted lists before. Those nice little, there's an example right here. This little guy here, this little guy here. So when you want to do what's called an unordered list, meaning it's doesn't have numbers, it's specifically, just dots. The order doesn't really matter. You start with a UL, unordered list tag, and then you put list items in, LIs, and you can put as many as you want. And then you can close it again, and that's going to be the end of your list. Similar to that is an ordered list. So it works the same way, except it will automatically add numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's ways which we won't get into now. You can customize that to not be 1, 2, 3. It could be A, B, C. It could be Roman numerals. It could be lowercase Roman numerals, that kind of thing. But these basically work the exact same way. And all you would have to change, if you made a UL and you're like, no, I want to order them, you don't have to even touch these. You would just replace the UL with OL. Just replace U with O. Did I miss one? I did. Okay, so those are kind of like the basic. These tags have all been around since the 90s for the most part. I think all of them since the 90s. They've all been there. And they're great. I'm going to talk about, this is still simple, but this was like added when websites started to have a little more interesting layout to them and you needed a little more customization and not just put a bunch of text and change the color. So basically this idea of divs and spans arise. So you can think of a div as just a rectangle, a square, a rectangle, whatever you want to call it, but it is a rectangle. And it's used when you want to kind of break up your content into different sections. And you can have divs inside divs, inside divs, inside divs, and basically, lay them out the way you want, which we'll get into in a bit. Spans are similar. The main difference is if you have two divs on top of each other, the second div will always go down to the next line. Unless you set some stuff in CSS to be like, make these things be beside each other, by default, it's like there's a div and then it's like a line break and then there's another div, the line break if you have a bunch of divs. Spans are just like divs except they don't break. So you can have, if you had 3 spans beside each other, assuming the browser is wide enough, they would all sit right beside each other, right snug next to each other. And yeah, that's what I kind of have here. Divs break to a new line and take up the full width of its container. Spans do not break to a new line and their width is determined by their content. Cool. And then, so we had divs. Divs were invented, spans were invented. It was great. We were able to like kind of do things a little bit more without hacking. But the problem was that search engines kind of were getting a little bit lost because they're like, well, we don't know what this is. It's just a div, like it could be anything. So essentially, I think it was in HTML4, they came up with the idea of semantic markup. So there's specific things like headers, footers, nav, section, articles. These are just divs. They're just a way that you can describe what your div is for so that a search engine or screen readers, basically any kind of accessibility can understand your site a little bit better and be able to make use of it better. The end user, unless they are using a screen reader, are not going to ever, unless they view your source, they're not going to ever know what this is. But it's really good for bots and accessibility. So they're just divs. They just have a nicer name. Okay. Before I get into CSS, I'm going to open up some code right here. And I'm actually going to, if I can, because I know my screen's pretty big, I'm going to try and zoom this. How do you do that again? There we go. Zooming. You can see my notes over here. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly, because I want to move on to CSS basically in 6 minutes so that we kind of have 30 minutes of HTML, 30 minutes of CSS, but I'm going to kind of walk you through this. So we talked about this before. I have a saying doc type HTML. I'm opening my HTML tag, and as you can see, it gets closed again here. I'm actually going to, similar to that thing, indent this a little bit better so that you can see what's inside what. So I have this, and I'm just going to actually save this. Now I'm using VS Code, which is just a text editor with some extra functionality. But as long as I save it as a .html file in VS Code or in Notepad or in many other text editors, I can actually, I'm going to just reveal this in Finder and bring my Finder over here. And I can see that I have this HTML file. And because this is just a basic page, I don't need a server. I don't need anything. I can actually just open this and open on my other screen. And there it is. What do you guys think? It's pretty sweet, right? I know it's just white, but there is one thing if you go, YA coding camp right here. That's the title that I was talking about. So if I like just change this and save and go back here and refresh, there it is, the name change, cool. Something that's cool about web pages is the front end web is fully, there's no way to like make it super secure. I can on any website go here and view page source, and I can actually see, and this is the same thing right here, like exactly the same thing. I can't edit this here, but it is it's a way for me to view people's websites and kind of see what they're doing, and maybe borrow something or whatever I would need to do. So that's called viewing source, and you can do that in any browser, but usually by right-clicking and view page source. And then there's another thing which is going to look very similar, but when we get into JavaScript, it will make more sense. You can also inspect on most web pages, and I'm going to put this at the bottom here. And similar to that before, I see what's called the DOM, which is the document object model. So it automatically is kind of indented and showing me stuff. This is probably, I'm going to try and zoom it. Oh, I lost it. Can I zoom my, I don't know how to zoom this. Sorry if you can't fully read this. But I can actually contract and expand things because it does that for me automatically. And something else I can do in here that you can't do in ViewSource is actually edit stuff. So I can actually like change this and I'll see up there that it changes. Now, I just changed it. I didn't change the file that I was working on. If I refresh, it's going back. Basically, I'm doing, after the file has been made, I'm making a change in memory to Chrome to kind of be like, hey, changing this. And this is super handy for lots of things, especially like when you get on those websites that have, ad block, like those like, you must turn off your ad blocker. A lot of the time you can go in here and actually like delete, a certain thing. And then it's like, I can view this website. And then you're like, you put on like that hacker music and you're like sick. I don't do that. Okay, so cool. But this isn't really looking like anything yet. So let's go and talk about some of the tags we did. I think we talked about an H1, my website. So I'm just making an H1 tag. Opening it and closing it. You'll see that my IDE, my editor, kind of automatically helps me with some of that stuff. So if I type like, H2 and close it, it automatically makes the closing one for me and puts my text where I want. But it's not that much, I recommend getting VS Code if you can, because it does help with those kinds of things for sure, but I'm sure you can also write it out. So I'm gonna go here and go my website. Now let's do a common mistake. Maybe I write it like this and I forget something. What's that going to do on my website? Oh, it didn't understand that the tag was closing. So in fact, now my whole website, even if I write like text later here and text later here, text later there, it's all going to be part of this H1 because I didn't close it. But I actually want to close it. Oh, I can't close it. There we go. So we have an H1. And you know what? I'm actually going to, just so I don't have to flip through so much, we're going to make this a little bit better. So now, yeah, now you guys can hopefully see better. And I'll even zoom this a bit. Okay, a couple more minutes HTML before. My website. What else did we talk about having? I think we had a link. So I'm going to do A, which stands for like anchor link. I'm going to give it an href, and I'm going to put https://google.com, as we saw before. And then I'm going to write Google, and I'm just going to save. There we go. If I click that, what's happening? We're at Google. We're going to go back. What else do we have? Paragraph tags we talked about. So this is a paragraph. There you go, as expected. And like I said, you can kind of have multiple, and it's going to kind of automatically put space between them compared to, and I'm just going to show an example. If we actually break. So normally the text has a little bit of line space between it, as you'd expect. But when you make a new paragraph, it's like full hard stop and, basically some space there. So let's get rid of that one. And then the lovely image tag. So image src, and I'm going to go back to that place kitten site. And we're going to copy this guy, and I'm going to paste it in here. And like I said before, an image tag, I don't actually do it like this. This will not work. I mean, the browser will probably figure it out. It does, but this is not semantically correct and open for errors. So all you really have to do is put a slash here, self-closing. Cool, we got a cat, meow. And if I change this to, a different width, there we go. So this is just because Place Kitten is a service that like you can be like, I want this width and this height. But say I wanted to make the image a different size and not really care what its input is, I can go width equals 100. And he's tinier. Now this is a square image, so it automatically calculated the height at 100. So this, if I did width and height by 100, it's going to be exactly the same. However, if I do change, if I put width and height together, it no longer will, it will listen to me as opposed to like the auto calculation. So you'll see that this will actually make my cat really tall. Tall cat. There he is. Or she. Okay, so there's some basic HTML stuff right there. And you'll see like, the browser does a good job. Every browser has a little bit of a different defaults for, what font should be used if you don't tell it, or, what color of a link is. This is blue, but it's purple because I visited it before. It's using looks like Times New Roman, and I can figure out all this stuff that it's doing just by what we were doing before, inspecting element. And there's this whole area over here that will actually tell me different things about it. But because I'm not really overriding and doing anything, it's just using the browser's defaults, which I can find by going into computed and actually, being like, what's the font? Times, cool. Times New Roman. All right, so that's kind of like HTML. And there's not there's a ton. We talked about ULs, we talked about things like HR. Oops, I need that caps, HR. Oops. Made that nice line. We could have lists, we could do stuff like that. And I'll show you the one other thing we talked about, which is a div. And divs on their own, they don't do anything. They don't look like anything, even if I put stuff in it. But what you'll see that's different here, so if I have two divs, you're going to see that the next one goes on the next line. And that's because if I inspect this again and look at the div, and it kind of shows you in the inspector what's happening. A div is this full width thing that will go to the next line when you have another one, versus something like a span. I'm going to put hi and put the second one as hello. So this one, you'll actually see hi and hello beside each other, and that's because spans don't conform to the full width. They're just their own width, and they can go against each other. Okay, so that's where we're at on the lovely HTML. So basically what I was getting at, I think, is that, you could make some cool content here, and, it might be good if you want to write a blog, you could probably use the default stuff and people will read it and it looks fine, but it's obviously not the prettiest thing in the world. This cat's really pretty, but other than that, it's a pretty boring looking page. So that's why I want to talk about the other part of this, this class is what's called CSS. Oops, command shift F, there we go. So CSS, really nice fade there. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's a .css file. It's basically in version 3. There is a version 4, but it's really just based on what browsers support, which is kind of a blend between these two things. And then it was initially released in '96, so a few years after HTML. And it's basically used to generate the layout and styling of a web page, because everything we were doing is kind of you just put content and then it goes to the next line, content, new line. There's not really a good way to figure out a layout where you might have a left bar and a right bar and all this stuff. So that's layout. And then styling is stuff like colors and fonts and all that. And we're going to be talking about both. So we'll talk about styling first. So it's definitely simpler, in my opinion. So, and there's a bunch of different ways to style stuff, but we're going to keep it really basic and talk about what's called inline styling first. So on any tag, virtually any tag, paragraph tag, H1, I can put something called style, an attribute called style, and I can give it multiple properties in here. And the properties have, each property has a name. So this property is called color and it has a value of red. And if you want to have multiple, you put a semicolon so that you can put more. You can have as many as you want. So this would basically make the font red and 14 pixels. Cool, and then you got the text would be there. So we'll show that in a moment, but I think you kind of imagine, oh, the text is red and it's a little bit, it's 14 pixels, which is probably the standard size anyways in most browsers. So some common examples, you might have, like I said, color, and we'll get into different ways to denote color in a bit, but yeah, you can put the word red, blue, green, whatever, or you can do what are called hex codes, which we'll talk about soon. There's things like font size, background dash color, background image, font weight, border color, and width. I've also put this note here. You can also make comments in CSS. And comments in general are basically ways that you can put stuff in your code that doesn't actually get rendered. And it's usually to remind yourself what this thing does. And comments, anytime you have a / asterisk, any text until the next asterisk / means it's a comment and the browser is not going to try and do anything with it. So we use, as you saw, we were saying the font size 14 pixels. There's a lot of times we need to set measurement units. So for things like font size, things like width, things like height. The most basic one is px, which stands for pixels. So that's how many, that's saying that's gonna be 300 pixels wide on your screen. You can also do widths and a lot of these things in percentages. So when you say width of 50%, it's going to, if it was like a div or something, it's going to fill up half your screen wide, or half of its container, which would be your screen in most cases, like your browser, so your browser window, not your screen. Then there's also something called ems, and ems are basically a unit that is like a ratio to your font size. So if your font size is 14 pixels, like your base font size on your body of your document is 14 pixels, and you say something's 1em, it's going to make it 14 pixels, essentially. And if you said 2ems, it's just going to double that. So it's a way to kind of like have this sort of base number and be like, I want this to be, 2ems, 3ems, 2.5ems. That way you can just change the font in one spot. If you're like, oh, the fonts need to be a little bit bigger, let's just change it in one spot. M. Colors. So we saw before that, and these can be used for things like the color of a font or the background color of something, and we can just put literally a word of a color, like the word red, green, cyan, magenta. I don't know. Now, don't use this because the problem is only if the browser like knows what that color means is it going to actually like render that. Otherwise, it'll just like go back to like a gray, or we'll find like, I think if you type a word, it will try and find a word that it knows close to it and make it. So you should never do that because every browser is different, and you'll have weird results in certain places. The only time I do red, like write red, is if I'm debugging something and I want to be like, I need to put a red box around this thing just to see where it actually is, and then I'll do that because it's temporary. So instead, what's really popular and pretty much the go-to is what's called hexadecimal colors. If you've ever used Photoshop or many other tools, it's essentially a way to represent a color. And the way it actually works under the hood is the first two values represent red, the second two is green, RG, yeah, and the last two are blue. Instead of it being, it's hexadecimal because it's not like you type in like 99, 55, 44 or whatever. It's I don't know how to explain this well, but basically F means full, like it's like the most. So it'd be the same as like, this means that it's full red right here when you have FF, and 0 is actually at the lowest. So this actually would render as red because it's saying full red, no green, no green, no blue, essentially. You don't really have to know though, because like a lot of the time you can just open up a photo editor or get one of those like Chrome extensions, color pickers, and hexadecimal color value. You can just tap on something and it'll be like, that's this color, and then you copy and paste it. Always starts with a number sign. Cool. There's also something called similar to that, but a little more straightforward, and you don't have to think about hex, is you can type in colors using a value of RGB, and then this is the red value, green value, blue value. 255 is actually the max, so it's between 0 and 255. So this would also be red. Then there's something called RGBA, which is the exact same thing, except there's a fourth property here that you can put, and that's actually the alpha. And alpha is like how transparent it is. So if you were to put a 1 here, it's the exact same thing as this. If you have a 0 here, it's going to be fully transparent. In this case, it's going to basically be, if it was on top of something white, it's going to be pink because it's half see-through. But essentially, you'll be able to see right through that thing. 50% of it. Okay, so let's go back as an explanation. So we were talking about doing inline styling, which is pretty basic, and I'll actually just flip over real quick and do an example. So I'm going to do on this tag here. I'm going to go style equals, and I'm going to give it a color of red. And if I can find my web browser and refresh, there we go. We got red. My IDE is automatically helping me here and showing me what that color is. You don't actually have to type an emoji that looks like red. It's just doing that for me. I'm also going to give it a font size of 34 pixels. Look at that, big paragraph, good times. So that's fine and that works, but it's also really tedious because you might have a bunch of paragraphs throughout your, say you had something like this, and refresh. It's like, cool. And then you're like, wait, not 34 pixels. I want it to be 32 pixels. So you're like, gotta change it. Oh, I missed one. Gotta change it. It's gonna take forever. 32. So inline styling, although it's good for I think learning and kind of understanding it, it's not really ideal because it's going to be really difficult to maintain. Like imagine, you had a bunch of pages and you wanted them all to share a similar style, like your page is going to become very hard to maintain. So that's fine. What I want to talk about that is one step better than inline styling. And you know what? I'm just going to scroll so we can get back to that easier. Okay. So we're actually going to do the next level. There's kind of like a few levels of CSS, but this, I think makes it a little more easier to understand. So what do we got here? So I'm just going to go back to my code and we're going to get rid of what I typed here. Save that. Something I can do in the head of my document is also create what's called a style tag. So because it's in the head, it's not something that's meant to be rendered. It's more like metadata. But I can do things like, okay, paragraphs, so P, do these opening and closing curly braces. And I can do that same thing that I did before. Color, red, font size, 24 pixels. And just so you know I'm not cheating, I'm going to make it actually blue so that we know something different. So what this is saying is all paragraphs in my document, I want to make them by default, their color blue and the font size 24. Awesome. So now if I went and actually duplicated this, a bunch of times, they're all going to follow that pattern. And if I wanted to make a change, no, you know what? Not 24, 16 pixels. Then there's 16. So I'm not sure I'm not sure if people are like following along or anything like that and trying to type this stuff out. I feel like if you are, I'm probably going a little bit too fast, but I'm also trying to kind of give this basic overview. Definitely in further classes, it will be a little more tutorial-ish in the sense that going to be kind of going at a pace where people can do things or whatever. This is to me more lecture format, but I'm just gonna keep this on my screen for like a minute in case people are trying to replicate stuff. And you can kind of look and make your site look, as pretty as mine. So I will, we got a little bit more time, so I'm gonna leave this up for a minute. I'm gonna look at the poll, see if anything's exciting has changed, and then we'll continue on. Yeah, when I'm in full screen mode, it's hard to see if, I don't even know, I saw some questions, but or something. Where did the chat go? Distance. Oh, chat. There's the chat. Okay, I found the chat. So let's see. Yes, if you want to ask questions, feel free to do in the chat now that I know that it's here. So the first question is, can we ask questions? I'm like, yes, now you can. And yeah, downloading VS Code, that's what I recommend. There's plenty of other options, but I find it's the most lightweight one, and it's free. Don't download Visual Studio Code by accident, or I think it's called Visual Studio, because it's a totally different, it's the same, it's Microsoft, it's the same company, whatever, but it's definitely a different ballpark and it's not free. So yeah, you can just Google, VS Code, download it, pick your, if you're on Windows, if you're on Linux, if you're on a Mac, and install it, and then you'll be good to go. And then basically, yeah, you would open it up and go file, new file, and when you save it somewhere, and everything should just work fine. Okay, I think I left this up for enough. So let's continue on. Okay, so we did that. And basically what this is, and I'll go back to my slides for this, you have something called a selector. So a selector is a thing that's like a way to select a specific type of tag. So we are using P as a selector here. I could also put H1. And if we saw that, now my H1 is going to be, that size and that color. I can also do fun things like I can say H1 comma P, and that will, as you can probably guess, the H1s and Ps will follow that rule. And they do. The only difference that is because an H1 by default has a font weight of bold, so it's using that versus the paragraph. But if I wanted to override that and make everything bold, I could go font weight bold. Boom, so now they look the same. But I don't want to do that. I just want my H1. No, I just want my paragraphs to be like this. And I don't think the paragraph should be bold, so we'll go to that. So that's called a selector. And that's one type of selector. You can essentially put any kind of tag. I could say divs, I could say spans, I could even say the body, because the body's a tag. And this will make everything blue and everything by default that font size. Oops. Okay, so selectors. It's a way to target HTML elements. And we did this already. So we had some text and we said paragraph, boom, boom, boom. Okay, now here's another concept. Say you had a few different paragraphs and some of them were, meant to be for something different. Like let's say, let's put a section here. I'm gonna do an H2, I'm gonna do section 2, and I'll copy that and paste it here and call this section 1. Oops, section A, section 1. Section 1, section 2. And say I want it to be like, I like the paragraphs, but in section 2, I want them to be a little bit different. Now, there's many ways you could do this, but for the purposes of now, I'm going to give these paragraphs a class. So I'm going to call it class, I'm going to call it like section 2. You can call this anything you want. Just so you know, you can call it whatever you want within reason. I'm going to give it a class of foo. Foo. And if I save this and click this, nothing's going to happen, because classes don't really mean anything until you give them meaning. So what I can do here is I can say, okay, yeah, I want all paragraphs to be blue and the font size to be 16. But actually, when I have a paragraph, and I'm going to use a dot denotes a class. I'm going to say paragraphs that are foo, I actually want the color to be green. Section 1. So this should render those guys green. And look, it does. Cool. So I'm essentially, giving this a class, and it's cool. You can give, this a class. You can actually have multiple classes just by putting a space between them. So I'm going to give this one like last paragraph. It's a class. And again, if I render, it's not going to do anything because I haven't told it anything. But I can be like, you know what? Any P's that are last paragraph, I'm actually going to make it red. So what this is going to do, red. Basically it's going, the browser's like, okay, that's a P, so I'm going to give it, the default P. That's a P, default P. Oh, this one has foo. Okay, I'm going to tell it that its color needs to be green. Oh, this one's foo. I'm going to tell it its color is going to be green. Oh, but it's also last paragraph. Oh, I'm going to screw that last thing. It's actually going to be red. So that's where the idea of cascading in CSS, cascading style sheets. Things can override things. So you can set, a default and then be like, but these do that and these do that. Cool. What's next? So that's classes, and they're used all the time. I see a question in the chat. What do you mean about foo? So I just gave it literally a random, just to denote that it doesn't have to be anything particular. Like I literally called it foo. You could call this like, blue text or something. You can call it blue text like that. You can call this whatever you want. Generally, the rule of thumb is use something that's makes sense for the content. You wouldn't really use foo because it doesn't mean anything. This is definitely a better class name. Last paragraph. So I guess if we were to make this a little more semantically correct, I would call foo green paragraph, and I would call this I'll just get rid of that one because we got green paragraph, last paragraph. And if I change this up here, instead of saying foo to green paragraph, paragraph E, it's gonna render the same. So sorry for using the word foo. I was trying not to confuse people by using foo, but I think I confused people. See another question about downloading. Yes, the program that you should download called VS Code. So you can search for VS Code as one word and just click download VS Code. And then, yeah, if you're on a Mac, which I know a lot of you are, download this here, and it'll just prompt you to download it and then install it. Windows will basically be the same idea, except I won't be able to install that because I'm not on Windows. So VS Code, yeah, and then everything should just work. Definitely in the next class, we'll go through a little more, I might even install it from scratch, and again, more as a tutorial than this is. Okay, so that we're talking about classes. You can also, there's something called IDs, and it's, aside from some differences that we're not going to get into now, it's kind of the same idea. IDs are generally meant to be like when you have one of something, whereas a class you can have many, but in CSS at least there's no actual difference between them for the most part. So similar to how I gave something a class, I could give this one an ID and just go ID equals first paragraph. And up here, I can go P, and instead of a dot, which is what we use for classes, we use a number sign. First paragraph. And let's make this color purple. And if we find our browser again, you'll see that that one is purple. So I wouldn't even, honestly, I'm showing it because you'll see it if you're looking at some of the source code, the ID is being used, but there's no real value in CSS aside from a few offside cases to use an ID. Generally, just do things with classes. Like the ID. We talked about this, the idea that, well, we kind of talked about this. We didn't fully though. Let's do something a little bit different here. So I'm going to give this div a class of, I'm going to call it box. And we're going to go back up here and we're going to say box. And we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to give it a background color of yellow. So instead of color, we're doing background color, and that's going to give this, this nice sort of yellow thing right here. And that's fine. I can also still say, okay, I want its font size to be 12, like, let's make it really tiny, 8 pixels. And the text inside of it is going to be 8. But yeah, inside inside this box, we could have other things. We could put another H1 and say hello. We'll see we have hello and we have this and everything. But I can also essentially what's called, this is also part of like the whole cascading idea. I can specifically target H1s inside my box by saying, maybe I want its color to be, we're running out of colors, by the way, color to be pink. So you'll notice that the other H1, which is this guy here, wasn't affected by that because I'm saying anything within the box, and I do a space here, any H1 inside that box, I want to be pink. And this can go on forever. If I had, say I had something else inside the H1, like a link, I could say, dot box H1A and tell its color to be something else and so forth. So when you have spaces, it means a child of it, versus when you don't have a space, you're saying like part of this. So it's like a paragraph with the class of last paragraph, I want to style like that, versus this is a box. I'm styling not the box itself, but the H1 inside of it. Okay. That's kind of what we just talked about for the most part. All right. So that was kind of like styling of CSS. I've decided due to the time right now that getting into layout of CSS, crunching that into what would be 4 minutes would leave everyone with many questions and be very confusing, and I would be completely out of breath. So I'm not going to get into that right now. That will basically be where we continue off tomorrow. So instead, we will just do a light review of some stuff. So I'm going to skip ahead, even though we will get to some of that, and just kind of go through, the first 3/4 of these slides. So yeah, we talked about HTML, and we can kind of see this page here that we made. It's a really nice, I'm really proud of it. So HTML, hypertext markup language, HTML, and it's used to generate just the content, as we kind of saw. Like, you could put content on, but it didn't really look good. You can do anything with it stylistically. All tags, most tags have things called attributes and values. So that was like an attribute of href and a value of a URL is one example. But we also saw it in images, having a source being the attribute and the value being a URL to that image. And we also had another attribute of width and its actual value of 100. So we have those in HTML. We also talked about how some tags are self-closing, such as an image tag, because there's not really, images don't have content within them. Well, a lot of them, for the most part, they do close. Paragraph, put some content in, closing paragraph. We talked a bit about divs and spans, and we talked about the semantic versions of divs and spans, like headers and footers and whatnot, which hopefully makes sense. Yeah, then we talked about some CSS. So cascading style sheets used to generate web pages, layout, and style. We only today focused on the style part of that, not the layout. And we showed that we could do it inline, and that was where we were writing the HTML, just hard coding in values. And we showed doing it in file, which was basically what we were doing here by having the style tag and closing style tag. We didn't get into yet the external file, which is generally the way you do write CSS to keep things kind of decoupled, but we will get into that on tomorrow. We talked about selectors, properties, and values. So selectors being, an HTML tag or a class or even an ID. Selectors, properties being things like color, font size, width, millions of properties. There's so many properties that you never even have to memorize because you can always Google them, and I do still. And then values, which is the other side of the colon. Property, colon, value. And I guess I never noted, I did mention in the inline part, but yeah, you need semicolons. If I don't have a semicolon here, basically this whole thing will get confused and won't know what to do. So I refresh, we lost that blue. We also, I guess, lost the font size. Let's see, we at least lost the blue. Yeah, we talked about different measurements. Specifically, we were doing stuff with pixels, but we can also do stuff with percents and EMs. I'll show you percent real quick, just so it makes sense. Box. So I can give this a width of 50%. And if we go back here, you actually see it's 50% of the page. So that's a good example, 50%, 20%. By default, divs are 100%. So this won't make any change if I didn't have it. But I could also make it wider, and then we're actually going to get a little scroll bar here. Look at that. 100%. All right. Percents. And then these last 3 points we did not even get to. We are going to get to them next. I think it's a better way to kick it off and whatnot. I want to leave, I know we're basically at the end of this class. If I was to give you any homework, if you're interested, I would say just make a little web page similar to what we kind of did here, maybe with some better copy that than what is than what I put here. Like story about yourself, or write about cats, find images about cats, and everyone loves cats. And yeah, mostly just focus on writing out some HTML, kind of like we had here. As well as doing a bit of this styling in the way that we did it. Now, I think the best way, I'm trying to think. I mean, this, what I'll do is I'll paste in, there's a YouTube video that's been live as well. I don't even know, maybe Zoom, you can replay these things, but I'm going to paste this link into the chat here. Just in case you want to, you're having a problem and it's, not working, you can go. I didn't have a ton of time to set up for this and also it's basically like soon I'm going to have this set up in a way that any of my code stuff at the end of the class I'll have up on a place for people to download it and view it, just so if you are stuck. But I think from what you kind of saw and probably some Googling, you can probably make something. So yeah, do that only if you don't have to. You can do whatever the heck you want. But I think that would be a good exercise if you want to kind of have it stick a bit more. Something about this course, like it's going to be a ton of review over and over, which for some people might be boring, but I think at this point, knowing these fundamentals, because even though we're just doing HTML, like a lot of this is the very basic stuff, like forgetting a semicolon or not closing a tag comes up in every programming language. So it's good to kind of like have a sense of it and have that really gone into your head. How do I, oh, okay, wait. Don't see it in chat. Oh, everyone I sent the YouTube link specifically to the other panelists, and I'm the only panelist. So I just pasted it again, the YouTube link. So if you need to, rewatch and brush it up. Yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna leave it. Thank you, Heather McTavish, for telling me that I had that issue. I didn't realize, like, this is my first time doing this. So, I don't know everything about Zoom, and I thought it was just kind of this big chat that everyone could see, but I think that's not the case. Anyways, I will leave you guys to the rest of your afternoon, and stay safe, stay inside, learn how to code. Now I just got to figure out how to end this thing. All right, until next time, tomorrow at 2 p.m. EST, 11 a.m. PST. Bye for now. How do I think I'm still live. This is awkward. How do I